Hi there and welcome to my channel. For those who are new, my name is Nicki. I'm an author and editor and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading and all the other things I love. Today we're talking reading again. If you missed it, I posted a video yesterday talking about some of the books I'd read this month. Usually I just do a single video of that, wrapping up everything I've read for the past 4 weeks. However, I had read so many this month that I thought it prudent to split it into two. So if you want to see the first part of that, I will give you a little link to that either up here in a minute or if not in the spiel. But this is the second part anyway, so I have 11 books to share with you. Let's crack on. First up, Bottled Goods by Sophie van Llewyn. This was a NetGalley read and I gave it 5 stars. Its basic premise was that a young woman called Alina is living in communist Romania, and one day her husband's brother defects to the West, and after that she and her husband end up under surveillance essentially, and it gets to the point where they realise they have to get out themselves. It was a really claustrophobic piece but also very lyrical. I really came to care about Alina very quickly. I wanted to know what would happen to her, and it's only a short story slash novella. I'd say probably call it a short novella, and but really great. Definitely captivated me all the way through. Really enjoyed it. The next book I read was Deutsche Lyrik des späten Mittelalters, and this is by edited by Burghart Wachinger. 4.5 stars for me. This book essentially is looking at medieval German poetry, and the book included the High German original on one page with the facing page in the modern German translation. I was reading this not for the old High German, just to practice my modern German, and as such I did ignore all the notes at the back talking about the translation from High to modern German and things like that, but just reading the poetry I really enjoyed them. I particularly liked the ones talking about spring and romance as opposed to the more religious ones, but even so it was all really great practice for me. I was quite pleased with how little I did need to look up. Most of the words I was looking up were sort of more poetic or olden day stuff, which I wouldn't have come across in my German lessons or in just watching TV and that, so really worthwhile read, and I found it very enjoyable. Next up I read A Superior Specter by Meyer. This was a 5-star read for me, and this was a literary fiction essentially but with a sci-fi twist. A man has left his own country, Australia. He's gone on the run to Scotland, and he's taken with him a piece of technology that allows him to jump into the mind of someone in the past, and the person he jumps into is this young woman. And when he was given the technology he was told not to jump into the same person too many times. However, he is ignored that warning, and in jumping into this young woman a lot, she starts to sense him there, which sets up the sort of premise for a lot of drama that goes on in her life and how it alters her life having him there in her head. Really great work, a wonderful idea, beautifully executed. So if you like literary fiction with a little bit of a fantasy sci-fi twist, definitely check it out. And I read that one. That was a NetGalley read, I should say. And another NetGalley read was 1,000 Books to Read Before You Die by James Mustich. A 4.5 star read for me. I liked the list. I liked the way it was compiled because in each instance James gave you a brief overview of why he'd picked the book, and also mentioned other books by that author and other similar read type suggestions, so you actually got more recommendations than the 1,000 in the title in that way. I thought his selection on the whole was good. It was a real mix of everything from non-fiction to fiction to poetry, even a graphic novel cropped up in there. So it was a nice diverse list. The only time the diversity faltered, I think, was that a lot of the non-fiction, I did feel there was a bit of a push toward American history, and that's probably because he's American, so it does make sense, but I did feel that there was a slight lean into the American side of things on the non-fiction books, but certainly on the fiction there was a really nice wide range from America, Europe, Africa and all sorts. So worth having a look at. obviously a lot of the expected ones are on there, but there were quite a few that I'd never heard of and that were new and I haven't seen on these kind of lists before. So from that point of view, it was something different to give this one a read. And another NetGalley book, The Chrysalis by Brendan, I can't even read my own writing, Denken, apologies, Deneen. It helps if I can read my own writing, doesn't it? I try to keep it tiny so I can fit them all on the page, but Deneen. And this was 3.5 stars for me. It's a horror story, and I don't read a lot of horror, but the premise of this one just appealed to me when I read the blurb. So I decided to give it a try. It was creepy, but it wasn't scary. And that's saying something because, as I said, I don't read horror. I don't really like it so much these days, although I read it in my teens. And there's a chrysalis in the basement of a house this young couple moves into, and it begins to have strange and upsetting effects on the husband, who becomes obsessed with it. Don't want to tell you anything more than that with it, because that'll unfortunately give it away if I say anything else, but it's worth a read if you like horror, and you like horror that's more the sort of creepy, sneaks up on you kind of horror, as opposed to the big shock factor horror. Then it's worth having a look at. Next up, I read Rise Up, Broadway and the American Society, From Angels in America to Hamilton by Chris Jones. This was a 4-star read for me. It's another NetGalley book, and it was an interesting look at the influence that current times have on Broadway shows, and also in reverse, the influence Broadway shows can have on politics and social thought. So as such, it was really interesting. I knew quite a lot of the plays and musicals they mentioned, but 1 or 2 I didn't, so I did tend to skim those a little bit because I didn't have a reference point for those, but certainly talking about the ones I knew, I found it a very interesting, well-written piece. Next up, I read Madilla by Ian B. Boyd, and this was another one where the author had asked me to do a review. So this was a 4-star read, or I should say originally Ian sent me this book as a thank you for hosting him on my blog, but then I said I would review it if I read it. So it's a 4-star read. It was a really interesting piece that kind of blended literary fiction with a kind of fantasy culture blend. A young girl named Madilla lives in this village fairly isolated from the modern world, but there are soldiers nearby, and eventually she ends up playing a piano, and she's heard by a woman who comes from outside the village who wants to give her lessons, take her away. But there, again, I'm just trying not to give away too much of the story, but there are repercussions on what's happening to her family, and how they're surviving and what's going on with these soldiers. So, and then there's an element of kind of folklore with the and religion, with the village's religion playing a part in her decisions and what eventually happens to her. So that's why I say it's literary fiction, but with a bit of a fantasy culture blend. But 4 stars. It was enjoyable. It's not one that I would absolutely rave about, want to read again, but I'm really glad I did read it. It was something a bit different. Next up, another NetGalley read, The Western Wind by Samantha Harvey. This was 4.5 stars for me. It's a historical fiction piece with a bit of a murder mystery element, and what was particularly interesting about it was that the narrative ran backwards. So we arrive at a village in the middle of this investigation into what's going on with the death of this man by drowning. But as the story progresses, or regresses, as we want to say, we discover more about what led to his death, what actually happened to him, who was involved, and the reasons behind that. I really loved it. I've seen a few reviews of people saying they didn't like the backwards narrative, but for me it wasn't a problem. Once I got into the rhythm of it, I think it worked very effectively. Next up, The Complete Photo Guide to Hand Lettering and Calligraphy by Abbey. This is from NetGalley again, and this is a 5-star read for me. It was a really excellent resource. It looked at different styles of calligraphy and hand lettering, gave you a bit of a breakdown about them, plenty of examples and practice sheets at the back. So if you're someone who wants to get into calligraphy and hand lettering, it was a really nice resource and definitely worth taking a look at. Next up is another one I reviewed on behalf of an author after a request, and it was Waiting for Walker by Reardon. And this is a story about a boy who's intersex and another who's gay. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was a really frank portrayal looking at not only the issues that the boy who was intersex was facing, but also the boy who was gay and how they were going to come together, whether it was going to be possible for them to work out how to do that, what they both wanted. And they were also looking at religious issues as well, since there was his brother had come back from the war and converted to Islam. So it was a very frank portrayal looking at a lot of big issues, but it was done in a really sensitive way. And I thought it was a really wonderful story. I really enjoyed the interaction between the 2 boys in particular. So it's definitely worth a look at. It was the first piece I've read with an intersex character, and I definitely found it really illuminating and interesting. And finally, we've reached the end with A History of France by John Julius Norwich, another NetGalley read, which was 4.5 stars from me. And this is a history of France from Roman times up until the end of the Second World War. I really enjoyed it. It's nice, easy reading prose, great for a general readership because there was plenty of detail, but it wasn't too scholarly or bogged down. The only thing that really stopped me giving it 5 was I wasn't entirely happy with how he described Robespierre in it. I won't get into one of my Robespierre rants, but that was the only thing that kind of put me off a little bit. But most people, that probably wouldn't even be an issue for them. So a really wonderful book, definitely, if you're interested in getting a bit of an overview of French history through the centuries. So I will end there for today. I will look forward to seeing you all again at the end of July, when I talk about what books I've been reading during that month. I will see you then. Bye for now, everyone.